Welcome to the Let Go and Be Free podcast, a podcast for those who grew up in an alcoholic or dysfunctional family. I'm your host, Ron Vitale, author of the Let Go and Be Free 100 Daily Reflections for Adult Children of Alcoholics series. If you'd like to learn more, feel free to visit letgoandbefree.com. And with that, let's get on with the show. Welcome to this week's show. For those who are new to the podcast, please visit letgoandbefree.com for more information. There are literally hundreds of blog posts that are there. You can find all the back episodes of the podcast, as well as the links to the Let Go and Be Free volume of articles. So with that said, thank you for joining me, coming back, returning, if you've heard this podcast more than once. And if you're new, welcome. So this week we're going to focus on the laundry list items number 6 and 7 from Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families World Service Organization. If you are new and you want to kind of read through the laundry list, you could visit adultchildren.org, and then under the literature section, you'll see an item called laundry list, and there is a whole list of items that are there. So this podcast, we're going to specifically break down laundry list items 6 and 7. What I'll do is I like to read the items twice, and then we will discuss them, break them apart, see what they mean, and interpret them as best we can of how we can learn from those laundry list items, see if it's something that we identify with, and how we can learn and grow to become happier and healthier. Okay? So here's number 6. We have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, and it is easier for us to be concerned with others rather than ourselves. This enables us not to look too closely at our own faults, etc. So I will read that again. I always like to read it twice. Helps me kind of process the information. I hadn't read these two laundry list items in quite some time, so it's like seeing them fresh from a different perspective, having time, added on to things for me to look at it from a different angle. So number 6, we have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, and it is easier for us to be concerned with others rather than ourselves. This enables us not to look too closely at our own faults, etc. And then number 7, we get guilt feelings when we stand up for ourselves instead of giving in to others. I'll read number 7 again. We get guilt feelings when we stand up for ourselves instead of giving in to others. Now, as I've said in past episodes, when I've gone through the laundry list, as well as when I've gone through the 12 steps for ACOA, everyone has a different perspective. Your perspective is different than mine, meaning these 2 steps I can identify with them a lot, especially at different times in my life. When you hear them, I think it's important for you to kind of process them and think through and be honest with yourself. Like when you hear them, is it something that you can identify with? Is it something that you don't? Maybe, write about it, think about it, go on a walk and think through what these might mean, and then put them away for a little bit, come back and look at them again from a different perspective, maybe after a little bit of time has passed. I always find that time helps create some mental distance, especially if there is something that is difficult to see, to be honest with yourself about. It might be real painful to read some of these laundry list items because you're like, oh yeah, I do that a lot, or I can really identify with that, or I did that yesterday, that kind of thing. So with number 6, for me personally, and this is something, again, you'll have to see for yourself, I can relate with the overdeveloped sense of responsibility. I mean, I've told stories, in this podcast in the past when I was little, after my mom and father, when they divorced, I remember my mother coming to me and saying, "You're the man of the house now." And I think I was like 5 or 6 at the time. It's like, I need you to, kind of, be strong, and we're going to get through this. That kind of, pep talk. And I know that she was saying that to kind of help me, get through the difficult times that we had ahead. And she wanted me to know, how important it was, as I was the older brother from my younger brother. I took that responsibility seriously. I did really well at school. I didn't act up, and cause lots of problems, around the house. That just was not my personality. I think because when I look back and I see how complicated everything was, after the divorce, my mom, we had talked with her parents. We moved back in with her parents. I had to start a new school. There were money problems. There was a lot going on, in my elementary, years, all the way up through even beyond, frankly, high school. After my mom remarried, there was a lot that was going on there. And when I think about that over sense of responsibility, that's always been how my mind operates. Is I've got the weight of the world, on me, for good or for bad. I'll take that responsibility on, and I will, help out. I will volunteer. I will do the extra work, on the job, etc. And there is a cost to that, because if I'm spending so much energy, on others, personally, for me, there's a time where I become resentful. That I'm like, why am I doing all this work? And I've had people say to me, well, why don't you ask for help? And there are times where I do ask for help, and either one, I don't get the help, or two, this is I own this. I'll look at it and be like, well, the work that somebody helped me with isn't as good as the work that I could do myself. So it's a lot easier for me just to shut up and do the work and get it all done. I know it's going to be done right. That I know is very judgmental of me. That's something that I need to work on. Not everything has to be done at my extremely high standards. And that last part, it's so easy to focus on others rather than ourselves. This enables us not to look too closely at our own faults. Yet there have been times where, I'll admit to this, I'm focused on so many other things outside myself that I'm not spending the energy and the time to take care of myself. In the example that I gave, I will gladly volunteer and do the work and, do everything that's necessary, burn the midnight candle, add in all the metaphors, all the similes here. And there's a cost to that. And that cost is the energy that I could be spending on self-care, on getting rest, on taking time to have some fun so that way I can recharge my batteries. I'm ignoring that. And by ignoring that, that's creating more of a problem for me. And that's where that resentment grows. There have been times, situations where like I'm literally feeling like I'm holding the fort up, like I'm the only one, the weight of the world on my shoulders. And I've learned at the job, I've learned on the home front that sometimes it's important to take a step back. So I'll give an example. When I started a new job, this was many years ago, but I remember starting a new job, and my boss at the time, we were talking, and I was being very honest with her, and I said, look, if we don't step in and, pick up and do this extra work, the whole project's going to fail. It's going to be this big problem. It's going to be a mess. And I remember her looking at me and said, sometimes it's important to let the balls in the air fall and drop. And I looked at her and I'm like, what do you mean? I'm like, it's going to be a failure. And she's like, but it's not our responsibility to, always jump in and save the day. Sometimes when you let those balls in the air drop, on a project, it's either one, going to cause the person that should be doing the work to step up because they realize they're playing a game of chicken with you, and they realize you're not going to be manipulated into doing the extra work. Or the people higher up in the chain are going to see that it's not your fault because you're not, responsible for it. You're just trying to step in to save the day. Others will get accountability for, what they didn't do. Sometimes it's important to kind of let things burn, because that other group or that other person's going to learn a lesson. And that lesson is they can't just, rely on others to kind of step in and save the day. I'm being very general, but you get the idea. And I remember, that was like an alien idea. It was just something I couldn't understand. And I was like, but we're going to have a big problem afterwards. She's like, yep. What are you going to do? And, for me, my instinct is like jump in, roll my sleeves up, okay, I'll give 200% rather than the 100%, to make this happen. But in that instance, in that circumstance, I realized that the lesson that my supervisor, what she was imparting on me, is that there is value in taking a step back and understanding where your boundaries are. And I know I say the B word, boundaries, a lot, in these podcasts. However, it's critical in your relationships at work. It's critical in your romantic relationships, in your familial relationships. Even with this step 6, this overdeveloped sense of responsibility, if, I am always jumping in and saving the day, am I allowing other people to learn their own lessons? An example, if I'm always stepping up to help my son or my daughter, are they going to learn the lessons of like, oh, wow, I should have done X, Y, Z, or next time I can do Y, instead of mom and dad's going to step in and save the day, hyper sense of responsibility. Oh my God, I got to do something to help them out. I'm going to stay up late and help them with their report and do the work. And, I'm going to this, I'm going to that. That's where that term helicopter parent comes in. And I think I've even heard, tank parent come in, that phrase, which I had never heard that one before. Heard that one within the last year, is that, your kid goes off to college and you're a tank parent. Anything that you don't like that's going to, supposedly hurt your kid, where instead of like a life lesson where they just need to learn responsibility, the tank parent comes in and just barrels through anything, and just like throws their weight around to kind of like destroy anything in its path. That is a, overdeveloped sense of responsibility. And that's not something that is healthy, because these boundaries are important to learn. I think a lot of problems in life can be solved with understanding your boundaries. And that's why I do really love the Serenity Prayer so much. Again, if you're agnostic, if you're an atheist, take the word God out of the Serenity Prayer, and just focus on, what are you responsible for? When it's like, what can you control? You can control your own actions. You can't control the world. You can't control what your romantic partner is going to do, your kid's going to do. You're just not able to control things that are outside of you. You can only focus on yourself. And when you realize that, and you kind of focus and, again, if you don't believe in prayer, meditate, allow your attention to understand, in this circumstance at work, if we jump in to save the day, then the other group is going to take advantage of us in the future, or it's going to create these other problems because your time is being pulled away from 2 other projects, which are priorities for your group, and this other one isn't a priority for you, or you're not taking the time to spend with your family because you're overworking yourself, etc. The ramifications and decisions and the ripple effect of this overdeveloped sense of responsibility creates problems for you. And it has for me, because I've spent too much time and energy saving the day rather than taking care of myself. classic example, I will think of everything to pack on vacation, and then I forget my own water bottle on the island because I'm so focused on taking care of everything else. I don't stop and process and say, hey, wait a minute. What do I need for me? Oh, I forgot this for myself. I was rushing to do all these other things. So again, that's a very simple example, but you get the idea. And then, the last bit where if you can't look at your own faults because you're too busy focusing outward, you could see how that could, create a problem. If I'm always meddling and throwing myself in the fray and causing a problem and being controlling, then I'm not spending the time and energy and looking at myself and saying, hey, you know what? Maybe I really, need to step over that line there. Let me step back, let somebody else, be responsible. And if it falls through, that's on them. They need to learn that lesson. I need to spend energy on myself. I need to focus on not trying to control everything. And for me, the over sense of responsibility is really tied into control, because when I was young, I felt like I had no control of anything that was going on in my life. So I do like control and I like structure over chaos. I do not like chaos. So for me, spending that time and energy to get something right is important because I like stability. But if I'm spending so much energy and I'm trying to control something, there's that boundary line again. Is my control taking away the learning lesson, the responsibility, accountability of another person? Yes or no? Is it true? Is this healthy for me? Again, those same questions I keep asking, podcast after podcast. Very applicable in any circumstance. Overdeveloped sense of responsibility. Is it true that I should step in and then, there's nobody else that can help? Yes or no? Is it healthy for me to work past midnight to get something done to save the day? Yes or no? You'll find that when you give yourself the space to think things through and allow that objectivity to come through, you're going to get different answers than what you may have gotten when you first read these laundry list items for the first time. And that's something that, again, time and distance and learning does give you a different perspective. I remember the first time decades ago when I read the 12 steps, and now when I read them decades later, it's a different experience. That's a good thing. I've learned things, over the years. Same thing with the laundry list. So give yourself the space, read them, process them, think about them, and then return to them, from time to time. This isn't something that, you don't need to read these every single day. Think about, what you can learn from this and which ones that you really feel some emotion about when you read. That's the telltale sign of like, oh, yeah, I need to work on that. So number 7, we get guilt feelings when we stand up for ourselves instead of giving in to others. So this is a complicated one because, when I look at the past and I see all the stuff that happened, within my family, the guilt feelings of like standing up for myself, I have experienced that I will doubt my own, thoughts of a situation because I don't want to push against authority figures. There's a couple things working against me, in this realm. One, obviously there were issues that I had with my father. So strong authority figure, there was a lot that was going on there, and then abandonment issues. So there's difficult times when I try to stand up, to especially like a male authority figure, because it brings a lot of baggage from my past to the forefront. But then, there's also, I was raised Catholic, and, for me, there was a lot of guilt and shame that was like just put on you of like, you're sinful, original sin. And, if you, when you follow these commandments, if you, do something wrong, there's venial sins and mortal sins. There's a lot of negativity, kind of burned into me from, an early age when I started going to Catholic school. I only went to public school, what was it? Kindergarten. And I think it was first and like second grade. And then from third grade all the way on up, literally all the way up through graduate school, was Catholic school. And there was a lot of, again, guilt and negativity kind of burned into me of, you must repent, you're wrong, you're sinful, this, that. So to stand up against, let's say, the authority figure of the church or the authority figure of a priest was difficult, for me, because it's like, well, they must know what's right about, my soul. And, I do remember specific times in growing up where, a priest was teaching us about sexuality and sex and marriage. And I remember the first time when that came up, we were kids, we were young, and we were just like, okay, well, I guess that's right. And I remember in college, we had a class, I think it was like marriage and family class, and a priest was teaching the class. And what was so refreshing is that there were, I went to a school that had basically 8 girls for every guy in college. And that was an extreme contrast because I went to an all-boys high school. So I went from male, testosterone and toxicity all over the place. I hated my high school. It was just it was like a jock, football, sports. And I'm just not into that. I mean, I enjoy sports, but I am not the one that wants to be on a team. And no, it's just not me. And went from that to 8 girls to every guy. So I'm sitting in this marriage and family class, and the priest is talking about, can't use birth control and this and that. And there were young women, there were women 21, 20, they were engaged to be married, and they're like, no, I'm not going to follow that. They were fighting back with the priest in class. And I remember sitting there and being like in awe, because, my brain, it was like, oh, well, you would never argue with the priest because the priest knows. And what I realized was, seeing that interaction, that these women were standing up for the rights for their own body. Like, they were like, no, we're not going to follow that. Like, you could teach us that, but we're not going to follow that. That's not what we believe in. That does not make us bad Catholics. And they were arguing with him, not yelling at him, but they were stating different points and saying, the church might say that, but we're not going to follow that. And here's why. To me, it was enlightening because I could see constructively someone standing up to authority. And, in the last so many years, in the last like 8 years or so, in America, when you hear people say, speak truth to power, people standing up and saying and for what they believe in, I now understand, from a different perspective of, it is important, to stand up and to basically work, and I'm being very clear on this, non-violence when it comes to standing up, for your rights and for what you believe in. And I have just been shocked to see how, our world has kind of devolved when it comes to violence. There's just so much violence, in America these days. And for me, thinking about, the guilt you feel when you stand up, for yourselves, and instead of just giving in to somebody, that authority figure of like, we know what's right, you must follow us. There was not a lot of choice that was given me as a kid growing up, going to Catholic school. It was like, this is how things are. You're going to receive your confirmation and the cardinal's coming and you must memorize these answers to 100 questions. And so like, I remember studying them night and day, because if the cardinal called on you, you needed to be able to recite the answer back. These specific answers. You must memorize these things. And so I did. And I remember the day of the confirmation, I think the cardinal asked like 2 questions and it was like nothing. Like we had spent hours and hours and hours. And it would have been so much easier if we would have studied these things and been able to answer the questions instead of like rote memory. They had to be these specific answers. And I remember at that time in my head, I was like, well, I'm young. I'm in 6th grade. And I remember, we were told we're going to receive the Holy Spirit. We're going to become defenders of the faith, when we're confirmed. And in my head, I got a great imagination. I'm seeing, archangels come down with light swords and shields and magic, and we're gonna fight off the devil and all these things. And I remember going through my confirmation, going up to the cardinal, and he gives you like it like a slap on the face. It's basically he touches your cheek, and then he takes the chrism, the holy oil, which is the burned palm from Palm Sunday, and he puts it on your forehead in the sign of the cross. And then I went back to my pew, and I'm like sitting there and I'm like, I don't feel any different. It's just funny because, what was built up by authority figures and what reality was entirely different. And, I did share the story in the past where when I decided to leave church, when there was someone, an older gentleman that was having difficulty breathing, and when the paramedics came in and brought the person out to make sure he got the help he needed, the priest just kept going through the service like nothing had happened. I mean, he's just reciting the prayers and going through the litany of everything, and the paramedics are with the stretcher just going right across in front of the altar. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is surreal. And I think that was one of the first times that I stood up for what I believed in, and I didn't feel guilty. I felt angry. I kept thinking in my head, if Jesus were here, he wouldn't allow this to be happening. He would be stopping and focus on the person that was having a medical emergency, and we would be praying, and we would, we'd make sure that this person got the help they needed, instead of like, well, the paramedics got it. We don't have to worry about anything. We got to get through this mass so that everybody can go back and, whatever, go to the movies on a Saturday night. Like, it was just the weirdest thing. So over time, I have learned, how to focus on like brushing off, guilt, where I can say to myself, is it true, that I've done anything wrong and that I should feel guilty? Is it healthy for me to feel this way? And I have much more, a clearer sense of understanding of what is healthy for me and what isn't when it comes to, guilt feelings when you stand up for yourself. If you're standing up for yourself because it's what you need, it's what you believe in, it's not like hurting somebody else. It's not violence. It's not, manipulating anybody. But when you are standing up for yourself, like, I don't want to work extra this weekend, or I don't want to go to this event because, I'm tired, I'm sick, whatever. When you stand up for yourself and you've gone through in your mind your boundaries of what you need and what somebody else is asking of you, or what they might be imposing on you, it's a different thing, in the sense that there's no need to feel guilty if you're trying to just take care of yourself and you need to rest. You know your body better than somebody else does. If you're tired, if you're hurting, if you're sad and you need some time alone to process your feelings, or you just want time to sleep, or you're sick and you need to stay in bed, there's no need to feel guilty about, I'm calling out of work and there's this problem. Somebody else can handle, the work. And I know we might think, going back to the sixth laundry list item, that we've got this overdeveloped sense of responsibility, but none of us are irreplaceable. I mean, somebody else can step in at work, somebody else can help, in other areas. I mean, there are the rare circumstances of like, there's only one car and you need to drive somebody and you want to do X, Y, or Z. That's where compromise comes in. And you have to see, are you always compromising? And is the other person not? That's where you got to have those conversations with other people and think through for yourself of like, is it okay to stand up for yourself? So I do hope that this has been helpful for you, and that maybe myself and you, we've learned something. We've learned that it's okay to take time and process and to get the things that we need rather than throwing ourselves into other problems, other circumstances, always volunteering, always trying to be the one to go above and beyond. Self-care is critical. And if we're not giving that to ourselves, are we really wanting to get better? Meaning, do we really want to feel healthy? Do we really want to be happy if we're always trapping ourselves into these circumstances where we keep giving, but we're not giving of ourselves to ourselves? So thank you again for listening to this podcast. Again, if you want to learn more, visit letgoandbefree.com. I hope you have a great week, and as always, be well.